Night presses against the windows of Sandringham. The Norfolk air wet and metallic. And you stand at the doorway as a glass syringe catches the lamplight. The king lies propped beneath an oxygen canopy, breath rasping like paper torn slowly. Beside him, Lord Dawson of Penn steadies a hand, searching for the swelling line of a jugular that no longer hides beneath the beard. Puncture. A hush so complete that even the clock seems to lower its voice. You can smell ether, sweat, winter wool. Someone whispers, "You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness, and what you're about to remember may never leave you again." If stories like this matter to you, patient, precise, and unflinching, subscribe and tap like. I make only one promise, no inventions, only what the record allows. Join and you'll hear history as it was, not as we wish it to be. If you find value here, share it with someone who would rather face the truth than the legend. And if you don't, pass it by in silence. And we'll continue for those who stay. Eyes open, breath slow. You are a junior attendant on the night corridor of the private apartments at Sandringham House. It is January 1936. A winter that gnaws the hedges bare. In the king's bedroom the air is warmer, damp with oxygen and breath. The lace of the canopy tending slightly as the machine sighs. George V is 70. A decade of hard smoking has beaten his lungs thin. Years of recurring bronchitis and the aftermath of a near-fatal pneumonia in 1928 have left him diminished. Though stubbornly exact about duty, in that older illness, surgeons had teased pus from a lung abscess to save him, the newspapers. And the public that listened between the lines learned how fragile a monarch could be and still continue. Now the fragility has returned, not as drama, but as attrition. You have learned, over weeks, the rhythm of royal illness. Messages pass like discreet ghosts. Bulletins leave in neat handwriting for the press. And the country strains at every word. Tonight, too, there will be a bulletin. The kind that stops conversation in kitchens and pubs. The king's life is moving peacefully towards its close. But you do not yet know those words are already penciled on a menu card by Lord Dawson of Penn, the physician who has lived this decline hour by hour. Dawson is immaculate in a way that makes the room seem less untidy. Even with bottles and stethoscopes and pads of careful notes laid like offerings on a side table. He moves with that composed gravity of men who have already made decisions in their minds long before their hands begin to carry them out. What is coming has been prepared for, in ways both ordinary and strange. Oxygen cylinders have been kept at the king's bedside since last year. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Cosmo Lang, has been alerted to be ready. The family has gathered not quite within sight, Queen Mary in her steady sorrow. The Prince of Wales pacing. The household staff dim in the passages. Your job tonight is practical. Bring water. Fetch the mat for the chaplain. Keep the coal scuttle filled. And close the drafts that make the tented canopy flutter. You are the silence that allows other voices to be heard. The hands that make a path for feet that must not stumble. This story is frightening for what it refuses to hide. The king is dying from what the records call bronchial catarrh and heart failure. The remorseless exhaustion of lungs that can no longer exchange enough air. It is the kind of death that, unassisted, can take long hours. That is the terror, not the scream, but the fade. You know this because you have stood the corridor for other deaths. And because Dawson has said, in the modulated tones of a man who never loses his footing, that there is such a thing as dignity that medicine may sometimes guard when cure is gone. How he intends to guard it will not be known beyond these walls until decades later, when a private diary is read and the quiet becomes a controversy. For now, the only thing that exists is the bed, the canopy, the man, and the clock that must be obeyed. Who are you in this? You are not a courtier with speeches to give, nor a doctor with calculations to make. You are the one who opens the door at a knock. You note how the silence twists when new instructions arrive. You can smell the difference between clean linen and linen that has been sweated through. You know the sound a kneeler makes on polished floorboards. You watch when Dawson checks his watch, when he signals for the archbishop, And when he writes the bulletin that will go out at 9:25 p.m., you treat the corridor as if it were a narrow bridge over deep water. And you keep walking. The last winter night, you take your post at dusk. When the frost whitens the stable yard and the lamps along the drive bloom with small yellow crowns. The house is restless but quiet. A hush folded over a routine that has become ritual. A footman pads past with a tray of teacups that will go untouched. The senior nurse, Sister Catherine Black, checks the humidified canopy and notes how the king's breath drags. Then pauses. Then drags again. You carry in a fresh ewer and notice the silvery clink from the oxygen valve. Someone has turned it slightly to soothe the throat that works so hard for so little air. The Prince of Wales walks the length of the passage once, twice, a third time, then stops outside the door and does not enter. You have learned to look away when faces suddenly resemble their childhoods. The day had begun with a pulse of hope. There was a period of sleep that steadied everyone's hands. But by late afternoon the strength diminished. The doctors had written a bulletin at 5:30. No improvements. Declining reserves. Since Christmas. The king had not truly shaken the weight that sat on his chest. Every step in the garden took calculation. Every breath a negotiation. Now the bed itself seems to be negotiating with him. Each linen fold bearing a little of the work his muscles refuse to do. You cannot help noticing the objects that persist. 2 photographs in silver frames angled toward the pillow. The small reading lamp with its warm shade. A book closed left face down as if it might yet be resumed by a steadier hand. By evening, Dawson writes the line that Britain will remember. He does it matter-of-factly. On a card snatched from some earlier meal. The ink drying evenly. The king's life is moving peacefully towards its close. The words feel at once consoling and ceremonial. Like doors swinging open onto a last corridor. A messenger takes the sentence down the staircase. A clerk arranges its release to the press. In drawing rooms and terraces across the country, conversation thins, heads bow, radios are tuned so low that listeners must lean in as if receiving a secret from the furniture. Here, the sentence arrives back only as an absence, for the room has already conformed itself to it. Even the curtains, you think, hang more respectfully than they did an hour ago. You wait, because waiting is what the living do around the dying. In the corridor, there is the soft friction of wool coats. The smelled-out chill of gloves warmed between palms. The Prince of Wales has the gait of a man who counts his strides. Queen Mary barely moves at all. She has perfected the stillness required of grief that cannot show itself. The archbishop arrives, stepping carefully as if entering a chapel laid across a bedroom. His voice, when it comes, is low as the padded ticking of a mantel clock. Syllables balanced to avoid awakening the complicated machinery of hope. Inside, Dawson attends to the work that, officially, is only comfort. He is not alone. The house physician. The consultants who have taken polite turns at the bedside through the holiday season. The nurses whose uniforms already smell of eucalyptus and wool. You have watched Dawson long enough to understand he is built for these hours. His voice divides silence into manageable shapes. His gaze reassures by its steadiness. But tonight there is a gravity to his movements you have not seen. It is not fear. It is the concentration of a man who has rehearsed the possibilities and now discards them one by one until only one remains. The king's face, even under the canopy, is the face that has stared down cameras and ceremonies for a quarter century. The beard hides the collapse of the jawline. But nothing can hide the weight of fatigue. He wakes only to the thinnest edge of consciousness. Asks for the empire, or perhaps merely mouths a syllable too rough to parse. There are stories that later will harden into a wry last line muttered against a resort town. There are other, crueler recollections from the nurse who takes his pulse and earns a flash of temper for her loyalty. You are present only for the body as it is. Too heavy for breath. Too light for sleep. The canopy holds a little cloud of warmth that fogs and clears. Fogs and clears, as if the bed were a small weather system to which all of England must now adjust. You remember the first time you stepped into the room after the oxygen apparatus was installed. It was like entering a greenhouse in winter. a wet warmth that unstitched the cold from your fingers. The cylinder hissed with a sound like wind folding into itself. The tented canopy made the bed a stage. Everyone who stepped within it became instantly careful, as if kneeling near an altar. The king disliked the contraption at first, fussed at how it fogged his spectacles and dampened his beard. Then he tolerated it, because that is what duty became: endurance. Tonight the apparatus is simply there, a third presence beside the man and the doctor, patient as furniture, absolute in its small kindness. He is no longer a man who strides, he is a man who receives. The bed receives him, the pillow receives his breath, the canopy receives his warmth, and the country receives the steady telegrams of decline. The dignity of it is a structure held up by dozens of small, faithful acts. You heat the stoneware bottle and slide it beneath the counterpane. You relight a candle that has guttered in the corridor. You make yourself small when the doctors move, because to be large in these rooms would be an impertinence to the space they have reserved for ending. You learn again that love, in a house like this, is expressed most often as good order. The last light goes out beyond the shutters. The house tightens its circle. Time, that had been measured in royal engagements and public ceremonies, is now counted in the seconds between breaths. The archbishop's prayers lace the air with familiar cadences. At the edge of them you hear a nurse's whisper count to 16 and then begin again at 1. Dawson checks the pulse and listens to the chest with a patience that gives nothing away. You have the impression of a man adding a sum he has already calculated, confirming what he knows. At some signal you do not quite perceive, the room organizes itself. Family are ushered nearer, though not too near. The edge of the canopy is a border no one crosses without necessity. Sister Black lifts the king's hand just long enough to settle it on a folded towel that eases the flex of his wrist. Dawson looks at the clock. Others look at Dawson. The bulletin has told the realm that the end approaches peacefully. Now the household conforms itself to that declared peace. The curtains are drawn tight. The lamps are trimmed. The servants' passage becomes a river with only one direction of flow. And then, quiet gains a new octave. It is as if the building itself leans in. You are conscious of the absurd, faithful details. The way the beeswax polish on the wainscoting holds the light. The chip on the water ewer's handle where someone set it down too quickly last winter. The faint scent of old lavender trapped in the wardrobe. The king exhales and does not immediately inhale. You have seen this before. The body questions its labor and then repents and resumes. But the pause lengthens. Sister Black's hand barely moves. Ready, not quite touching. The archbishop's prayer narrows to a murmur that hardly uses air. Dawson straightens. It is not a sudden movement, only a line drawn with firmer ink. He confers quietly with the other doctor, and then with the archbishop, whose hands make a chapel as he listens. You cannot hear words, only the cadence of men trained not to let their tones disturb a room. The Prince of Wales looks older than he did half an hour ago. A messenger's shoes whisper along the corridor. Somewhere a telephone clicks and settles. The menu card bulletin has gone. London will be ready. You feel, without knowing how you know it, that the house has begun to move in rhythm with a timetable none of you authored. You do not think about newspapers, that belongs to other rooms. You think about breath and the geometry of bedsheets, about the way a watch's tick can synchronize a whole household to itself. When Dawson finally turns back to the bed, you see that in his face which you have seldom seen in any face, the decision that ends a series of decisions. His fingers rest a moment on the king's sleeve, lest anyone imagine that medicine is only instruments and never touch. He speaks to Sister Black, who nods and looks at the cabinet as if it were a door that opens only one way. The archbishop kneels. The family gathers. The room narrows to the space between the king's throat and the doctor's steady eye. The corridor behind you fills and empties in silent shifts as the great house makes itself ready for news it will only pretend to find surprising. You fold your hands. You breathe so quietly your own lungs seem to belong to the century rather than to you. The wind scratches at the panes and goes away. Somewhere skins of ice form on the buckets in the outer yard. Somewhere a clerk lines up the type that will make the headline. Though the ink is not yet on the press. Close to 10 o'clock. The hour peels like the skin of a fruit. You adjust the draft excluder at the threshold and think of the Jubilee crowds. Bunting put away. Cheers gone quiet. Dawson nods for the spare oxygen cylinder to be checked. A nurse warms her hands and smooths the king's hair clear of the temple. The archbishop whispers. You catch only the word commend. In the servants' hall, someone sets a copper kettle on the range, then remembers the order for silence and lifts it before it sings. The corridor seems to shorten by a pace. The king's eyes flicker, unfocused, then settle. Dawson listens, sets his watch, and gives an instruction sending Sister Black to the cabinet. 10 strikes and fade. The calm is arranged carefully like a table laid for a guest expected at midnight. The act and the hour. You remain in the corridor, your back to the wall, while the air inside the king's chamber thickens with a kind of stillness that is not natural sleep. The hour has reached its most fragile balance. Every breath is counted, every pause between them threatens to be the last. A hush has already wrapped itself around the bed, but there is another silence still to come, the silence after the decision. You hear the scrape of a drawer opening. Sister Catherine Black, trusted nurse since the last grave illness 8 years before, bends low to retrieve the instrument case. The click of the latches is delicate, like the unlocking of a reliquary. Metal catches the lamplight. On the tray, a syringe lies waiting, its barrel clear, its plunger oiled. Beside it, 2 vials. One of morphine, another of cocaine. These are not the gentle doses of pain relief or stimulation that have carried the king through restless nights. These are calculated in strength, chosen for finality. Lord Dawson of Penn stands at the bedside, watch in hand, gaze firm. Later, in his private notes, he will write in his compact script that he intended to ensure that the end, whenever it came, might not be needlessly protracted. It is a physician's phrasing, clipped, nearly antiseptic, yet behind it lies the choice that separates ordinary death from arranged departure. He will also write of a reason spoken in the chamber tonight, that the king's last breath should be timed for the dignity of the morning papers, and not fall first into the pages of the evening tabloids. A monarch's death, in Dawson's eyes, must be announced with gravitas, not gossip. The family remains nearby but not within sight of the act. Queen Mary, steadfast, sits with her hands folded, lips pressed white. The Prince of Wales paces again, halting only when a murmur from within the room makes him stiffen. None of them is invited closer. What occurs now belongs to the physician, the nurse, the archbishop kneeling in prayer, and you, stationed by the door, see what many others never will. The king stirs faintly, eyes half opening, pupils dulled. His breathing is shallow, ribcage rising in weak tremors beneath the counterpane. The smell in the room is one of linen dampened by sweat, of oxygen metallic and dry, and of the faint sweetness of chloroform residue from swabs once used. You steady your stomach against the mix of odors. It is not foul, but it carries the unmistakable signal of a body too near its ending. Dawson steadies his hand. The first vial, morphine, draws into the syringe with a slow pull. The liquid glimmers, amber in the lamplight. He expels the air bubble with a practiced tap, a single bead forming at the needle's point. He bends to the king's neck, fingers tracing the jugular line. The puncture is smooth. The plunger descends. 5 grains of morphine enter the royal bloodstream, an immense quantity. Beyond palliation, sufficient to blanket the nervous system and halt the body's rhythm. The king exhales heavily, chest rising once more as though reluctant to surrender. There is no pause. The second vial, cocaine, is drawn. 10 grains. Dawson has prepared. This stimulant, in a paradox understood only by physicians, does not rouse, but compounds the shock to a failing heart, ensuring the cessation that morphine has already begun. The needle pierces again. The plunger falls. The body upon the bed trembles faintly, then slackens. You feel the air change. It is not louder, nor quieter, but different, emptier, as if a thread that tied the man to the moment has been cut. The archbishop continues his prayer without pause. Cadence steady, voice unwavering. Sister Black places the syringe back upon the tray, covers it with a folded cloth, and rests her hand gently on the king's wrist. Her eyes flicker briefly, then steady. Dawson checks the pulse, counts silently, and nods once. The time is 11:55 p.m. The king's life has ended, not solely by illness, but by the hand of his physician. The room absorbs this fact without disturbance. No announcement, no exclamation, only a stillness so complete it seems carved into the walls. Minutes pass, though you could not say how many. Dawson writes a final line in his notebook. The letters careful even as ink pools slightly at the nib. Death hastened by morphia and cocaine. It will remain hidden in his private archive until 1986. Half a century later, when the diary is made public and the world learns what was done in this chamber. For now, you witness only the outward signs. The nurse smooths the bedclothes. The queen is called in, composed even in grief, to look once more upon the face of her husband. The Prince of Wales enters after, eyes red but voice steady, already weighted with the crown he will soon inherit and quickly discard. The archbishop pronounces the commendation, blessing the body now that the soul is believed departed. The oxygen canopy is lifted away, its frame folded, its hiss silenced. The room breathes differently now, as if relieved of a burden. Outside these walls, the world does not yet know. The nation sleeps, unknowing that its king has gone. The bulletin will be issued at dawn. In the solemn language Dawson prepared, the king passed peacefully away at 11:55 p.m. No mention will be made of syringes, of grains, of calculations. No whisper of deliberate euthanasia will pass official lips. To the realm, it is a dignified, natural close. To you, standing in the doorway, it is both more and less, a death arranged, a life abbreviated for dignity, an act wrapped in silence. The body cools slowly, linen is replaced, the pillow adjusted, candles set on either side. The undertakers will come before morning to prepare for the lying in state. But for now, the chamber is guarded as if it were still the seat of authority. Guards take their stations, boots soft on carpet, attendants bow as they pass. Though the man they honor no longer draws breath, you cannot rid yourself of the image, the clear barrel, the plunging hand, the moment when two chemicals became history. You feel it etch itself into memory, not as outrage, not as relief, but as fact. The king was euthanized by his doctor. And you were there. Aftermath and announcement. You stand at the threshold as the clock strikes midnight, and the air in Sandringham grows heavier, not lighter. The king's chest has ceased its rise and fall, yet the room continues to breathe in its own way, candles guttering, attendants shifting, the muffled scrape of chairs drawn back for the bereaved family. The body that had borne robes, medals, and a crown now lies still beneath plain linen. The syringe has been covered, the tray removed, and the scent of antiseptic hangs faintly where skin was pierced. Lord Dawson of Penn, unshaken, closes his notebook with the care of a man sealing an envelope. In that final line, he has recorded what the world will not know for 50 years. The king's death was not entirely nature's work. The first duty is not grief but order. Dawson confers with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Cosmo Lang, who had knelt in prayer as the injections were given. Their voices are low, matter of fact. The Queen is ushered forward. Mary of Teck, stalwart as always, bends briefly over her husband's body, lips barely touching his forehead. She does not falter. The Prince of Wales follows, gaze fixed, jaw set. His eyes are rimmed red, but the look he casts at his father is already half turned toward his own inheritance. Behind him, the Duke of York, soon George VI, watches with a mixture of sorrow and apprehension, the weight of unexpected kingship pressing invisibly onto his shoulders. The household shifts to ritual. Curtains are drawn fully against the January night. Candles are lit at head and foot. Sister Catherine Black smooths the beard that had once been the face of Britain's empire, adjusting the jawline to preserve dignity in repose. The oxygen tent, symbol of modern science, is dismantled and carried out, leaving the chamber with only wax and shadow, as though the 20th century itself has been removed from view. Dawson takes up the card already prepared earlier in the evening. The king's life is moving peacefully towards its close. That sentence had been issued at 9:25 p.m. Now a new one must be written for the nation. At 11:55 p.m., according to his note, His Majesty passed peacefully away. This will be the official truth. Broadcast by the BBC. Printed in the Times and the Daily Telegraph. Repeated in hushed voices across kitchens and parishes by morning light. No one will mention morphine. No one cocaine. No one the syringe. The bulletin is the voice of the Crown. And the Crown does not speak of such things. In the corridor, messengers hurry. Telephone calls cross Norfolk's frozen lanes. A car is dispatched to King's Lynn railway station to alert the rail staff who will carry black draped notices down the line to London. By dawn, the capital will awake already shrouded in mourning. The BBC, under solemn orders, interrupts its late programming to read the words of Dawson's bulletin. No music is played, a chime tolls, and then silence. Across Britain, in parlors and bedrooms, listeners sit upright, holding their breath as if sharing the moment of passing themselves. You sense the house itself change nature. Until midnight it was a private sickroom, now it is a national shrine. Guards of honor assemble in the courtyard. Clergy prepare vestments. The undertakers from J.H. Kenyon arrive discreetly before dawn. Black-coated, their steps reverent but brisk. They know the tasks well, the washing, the anointing, the dressing of the king's body in uniform and decorations suitable for transport to London. Embalming fluid, sharp and chemical, overlays the lingering smell of oxygen and sweat. The king's features are arranged, his eyes sealed, his jaw supported with a linen band that will be removed once rigor mortis sets. You, standing aside, smell the faint sting of formaldehyde and carbolic soap. By morning, bulletins are pasted on walls in London. The king is dead. Shops draw blinds. Black armbands appear on tram conductors, clerks, and soldiers. Church bells toll in unison across towns. In Parliament, members bow their heads, and silence reigns where debate usually thrives. The Prince of Wales is proclaimed Edward VIII, his accession overshadowed by the enormity of what has just been lost. The newspapers, their presses already inked, carry solemn columns bordered in black. Some print Dawson's precise words. His Majesty passed peacefully away at 11:55 p.m. at Sandringham. There is no hint, not a whisper, of syringes or decisions. To the public, it is a death in God's time, not man's. The king died, peacefully. The word chosen with purpose, repeated until it takes the shape of truth. Days pass in ritual. The body is moved to Westminster Hall to lie in state. You travel in the cortege, a silent attendant among hundreds. The coffin, draped in the royal standard, rests on a catafalque beneath the great medieval hammerbeam roof. 4 candle flames stand like sentinels at each corner. Guards of the household division mount vigil, heads bowed, swords reversed, reliefs rotating through the long watches of the day. Thousands file past in silence, the shuffle of their shoes echoing like surf against stone. Women weep quietly. Men remove their hats. Some kneel briefly. Others cross themselves. Others simply bow their heads in awe. You smell wet wool, cold air rushing in through the doors. The faint tang of wax as the candles burn down. The funeral, held at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, is a spectacle of solemnity. Black horses draw the gun carriage. Drums beat muffled rhythms. The archbishop intones prayers that float upward into the Gothic vaults. You watch as the coffin descends into the vault beneath the chapel floor. A slab will be placed above it, inscribed with name and dates. The king who had ruled an empire, on which the sun never set, is enclosed in darkness. And still, outside these sacred walls, no one questions the manner of his end. Dawson issues medical bulletins that speak only of bronchial illness, exhaustion, and heart failure. The press accepts. The public grieves. The world moves on. Only in private does Dawson keep the truth, ink on paper. stored in his archive, never spoken aloud beyond a circle of professionals. He believes he has acted for dignity, for mercy, for the image of monarchy. His notes mention the press deliberately, that the timing of death was hastened so that it would appear in the dignified morning newspapers, not in the less appropriate evening journals. The decades pass. Edward VIII abdicates before the year is out. George VI reigns, then dies young. Elizabeth II ascends, her father's brother's shadow long gone. The century twists through war. Empires end, new monarchs, new nations. George V's death is remembered as peaceful, natural, ordinary in its inevitability, until 1986. That year, Dawson's diary is published. The words emerge like a whisper from the grave. At about 11 o'clock it was evident that the last stage might endure for many hours. It was decided to determine the end. I therefore injected morphia and shortly afterwards cocaine into the distended jugular vein. He died at 11:55 p.m. The end was, in fact, hastened, but only to spare the king's suffering and to preserve his dignity in death. The revelation shakes Britain. Historians, doctors, ethicists debate. Was it murder, mercy, or something in between? Was Dawson acting on his own authority, or with tacit royal approval? The secrecy, kept for half a century, ensures that no witness remains to question him. Some praise his compassion. Others condemn the arrogance of timing a monarch's death for the morning press. For you, the witness, the memory had never faded, the amber vial, the plunge of the needle, the stillness that followed, the words, passed peacefully away, had always sounded to you like a curtain drawn across a truth too heavy for daylight. And yet, even after 1986, the official record remains unchanged. George V is still remembered in memorial books, documentaries, and plaques as a king who died quietly in his bed at Sandringham. The nation continues to commemorate, laying wreaths at his tomb, rarely mentioning Dawson's syringe, silence, carefully maintained that night in 1936, still echoes into the present. The corridor at Sandringham remains. Visitors walk it now, unaware of what you saw, the tray, the vials, the watch consulted before midnight. They see only the grandeur of a royal estate, the trappings of monarchy, the history etched in photographs. The reality of the hour when life was shortened by design lingers invisibly in the bricks and floorboards. You are left with the memory, the room that breathed, the canopy dismantled, the sentence broadcast, the coffin lowered, the diary sealed. You cannot forget. The truth is not in the bulletin, not in the funeral rites, not even in the slab at Windsor. The truth is in the sound of the plunger, the silence that followed, and the note in a doctor's hand that surfaced half a century too late. The public face versus the hidden truth. You walk again through the long galleries of Sandringham, weeks after the funeral, and already the place feels less like a deathbed and more like a monument. The furniture gleams as it always did. The carpets are brushed. The portraits on the walls do not flinch. The official bulletins are framed in memory, words chosen to preserve order and serenity. To the public, George V is the king who died peacefully, a monarch who endured sickness with dignity and slipped gently into eternity at the hour appointed by God. No one outside these walls knows about the syringe. The newspapers of January 21, 1936, confirm the illusion. The Times publishes Dawson's bulletin word for word. His Majesty passed peacefully away at 11:55 last night at Sandringham. Black borders enclose the text. Pages are heavy with tributes. Radio announcers repeat the phrasing with a gravity that sounds like stone. Obituaries praise the king's devotion, his sense of duty, his quiet steadiness through war and depression. They describe a reign that began with empire at its zenith and ended with its foundations cracked but still standing. Not one line hints that the end was, in truth, a calculated act. You feel the weight of that silence. It is the silence of institutions, of reputations, of power that requires serenity even in its last breath. Dawson himself appears before the world as the model royal physician, dignified, precise, the architect of a merciful passing. His own account, preserved in private, will never cross his lips in public. When questioned, he speaks only of bronchitis, cardiac failure, exhaustion. The phrase, peacefully away, becomes scripture, unassailable. Among medical circles, however, whispers circulate. Euthanasia is already a subject of quiet debate in the 1930s. Britain has no law permitting it, no framework of consent. To administer a dose intended to hasten death, especially to a sovereign, would be considered criminal if openly acknowledged. But no charges are brought, no suspicions voiced, because no evidence is known. Dawson's colleagues understand the fine line between relieving suffering and deliberately ending life. Many suspect he walked that line. None speak. You consider Dawson himself, a man of reputation, elevated to the peerage as Baron Dawson of Penn. He had served the king for years. Through crises, operations, and recurring illnesses, his authority was enormous, his access unparalleled. He was, in effect, the gatekeeper of royal health, the figure who determined what the nation was told and when. His final act, in his mind, was consistent with that duty: to preserve the monarchy's dignity by preventing an undignified, prolonged death. But his reasoning, that the announcement should appear in the morning papers, not the less appropriate evening journals, reveals a calculation that chills. A man's final breaths weighed against a newspaper deadline. The family never speaks of it publicly. Queen Mary never refers to euthanasia, only to the sorrow of loss. Edward VIII, who reigned for less than a year, later wrote of his father's final hours only in generalities, describing the atmosphere as peaceful, without suffering. George VI, who carried the crown after the abdication, never addressed the details. Silence was the gift they gave to the monarchy itself. As decades unfold, the official version hardens. Schoolbooks, documentaries, state commemorations all repeat the same words. George V died peacefully at Sandringham. Visitors to Windsor pause at his tomb and read only name and date, not the method of passing. The monarchy, careful of its image, never invites speculation. Dawson dies in 1945, his secret still locked in his papers. He is remembered as a distinguished physician, his barony intact, his reputation unsullied. Yet in the world beyond Britain, euthanasia becomes a subject of fierce debate. In the Netherlands, activists begin pressing for a legal framework. In America, cases occasionally reach headlines, physicians accused of crossing the line between palliation and killing. In Britain itself, the issue remains taboo, whispered in medical ethics conferences, discussed in careful, abstract terms. No one invokes the name of George V. The monarchy is immune from such speculation. You stand in Westminster Hall during later years, when the king's death is recalled in anniversaries. The official narrative is repeated by guides. He died peacefully here at Sandringham in 1936. Surrounded by his family, after a long illness, the words flow easily, comfortably. They allow the nation to remember its king as a figure of serene endurance, not as the patient of an act that remains controversial. And then, in 1986, the silence breaks. Dawson's diary is published, his private notes edited and released. The world learns what had been hidden, that morphine and cocaine, in deliberate lethal doses, were injected to hasten death, that the decision was made not only for mercy but for timing, so that the morning papers, not the evening tabloids, would bear the announcement. The revelation shakes Britain. Newspapers carry headlines: King George V was euthanized by his doctor. The public, accustomed to the peaceful legend, confronts the unsettling truth. Debates erupt in Parliament, in churches, in universities. Was Dawson's act murder? Was it compassion? Did he act alone, or with tacit approval from Queen Mary or the Prince of Wales? No record exists of consent, no evidence of discussion. Dawson's words stand alone, stark, clinical. Some commentators call him courageous, sparing the king hours of suffering. Others condemn him as arrogant, presuming to play God. The monarchy, caught between the revelation and the desire for dignity, offers no official comment. Silence once again shields the institution. You remember standing in the doorway, watching the syringe pierce the jugular vein. You recall the amber liquid, the bead at the needle's point, the stillness that followed. You know what you saw. For decades, the world did not. When they finally did, the story was debated as history, as ethics, as politics. But to you, it was neither theory nor abstraction. It was an act performed in lamplight, in a room scented with oxygen and wax, at the hand of a physician whose face betrayed no hesitation. In the years after 1986, historians revisit the reign of George V with this new context. His devotion to duty, his role during the First World War, his careful management of empire, all of it now ends with a final chapter that unsettles. The peaceful monarch did not merely die, he was euthanized. The revelation colors perceptions of the crown, of medical authority, of the line between mercy and expedience. And still, for most visitors to Windsor, to Sandringham, to Westminster Abbey, the official story suffices. The plaque remains unchanged. The guided tours speak of peaceful passing. The silence endures. Even now, the diary is read by scholars. But the wider public continues to prefer the legend. Perhaps it is easier to believe in peace than to confront the calculated decision that ended a king's life by syringe. You, however, cannot choose ignorance. You carry the memory, sharper than any headline, the dim light, the folded towel beneath the king's hand, the syringe hidden beneath a cloth, the physician's watch consulted before midnight. The truth is not an abstract revelation from 1986, it is the scene you witnessed. The act you cannot forget. In that sense, you know both faces of the story, the public one, broadcast and printed, that soothed a nation in grief, and the hidden one, written in a private diary, that surfaced only when time made it safe. The king's death belongs to both realities. History holds them uneasily, side by side, and you, the witness, stand at the seam where they meet. The legacy of a managed death. You step out from the shadowed corridors of Sandringham and into the long reach of time. The death you witnessed does not remain sealed in that January night. It leaks forward, through bulletins, through silence, through diaries, and becomes something larger than a single monarch's end. It becomes a touchstone for questions of medicine, ethics, and the power to decide when life should close. In 1936, the narrative is simple. The king died peacefully, surrounded by family, guided by prayer, tended by his trusted doctor. That is the version repeated in pulpits, classrooms, and newsreels. The monarchy, still the axis of British identity, requires no fissures in its image. Dawson is praised for his devotion. His medical peers recognize his steady hand. There is no suspicion that his hand carried more than comfort. For almost 50 years, the truth slumbers in private papers, undisturbed. But when Dawson's diary is published in 1986, the story fractures. Here, in Dawson's own words, lies the admission. He injected 5 grains of morphine and 10 of cocaine into the king's jugular vein to determine the end, ensuring that death would be both merciful and well-timed for announcement. The nation reads the phrase and recoils. For many, it is the first time they have confronted euthanasia not as an abstract debate, but as a fact attached to the death of a sovereign. You remember the hush of that night, the plunger descending, the stillness after. To you, it was never theory, but to the world, suddenly confronted with it decades later, it becomes a storm. Medical ethicists seize upon the case. Some argue Dawson acted out of compassion, sparing the king from hours of gasping, wheezing decline. At 70, weakened by years of bronchitis, smoking, and infection, George V faced only suffering in his final hours. Dawson, they say, offered mercy. Others condemn him. No consent was documented, no request made. The decision was his alone. To time death for the convenience of the morning press, so that the news would break in the Times rather than the evening tabloids, appears callous, even grotesque. Was it the king's dignity Dawson protected, or the monarchy's public relations? The debate rages, unresolved. The church voices discomfort. Archbishop Cosmo Lang, who was present at the deathbed, never spoke publicly of what was done. But theologians later argue that to hasten death deliberately, even for mercy, crosses a sacred boundary. Life, they remind, is not to be measured against a timetable of newspapers. And yet, others within the clergy note that Christian compassion has long recognized the value of easing suffering. The act is judged again and again, through different moral lenses, none of them final. In Britain, the revelation reignites discussion of euthanasia in law. Proponents of legalization cite Dawson's Act as proof that even at the highest levels, in the most sacred chamber of monarchy, the line between prolonging and ending life is sometimes crossed. Better, they argue, to create a framework of consent, transparency, and legal protection. Opponents reply that Dawson's secrecy proves the danger, one man's judgment ending a life in silence. Hidden for decades, George V's death becomes an exhibit in parliamentary debates, cited by both sides, used to argue for mercy and against abuse. You think of Dawson himself. He never confessed publicly. He never faced censure, never trial. His reputation in life remained untouched, his barony intact. He died in 1945, honored as a physician of the crown. Only in death did his private words reach daylight. In some ways, his silence succeeded. The monarchy's image was preserved. The king's death was remembered as peaceful. Dawson's action shaped not only the end of a life but the memory of it for half a century. The monarchy, too, survived untouched. In 1936, Britain faced constitutional crisis with Edward VIII's abdication. That drama overshadowed any curiosity about George V's final hours. The abdication became the scandal, not the syringe. By the time Dawson's diary appeared, the monarchy had already weathered war, decolonization, and social upheaval. The revelation did not topple the institution, it merely added a dark footnote. And yet, for historians, the note is significant. It reveals the degree of control exercised behind palace walls. It shows how the monarchy's image was managed not only in life but in death. A king's last breath was not left to chance, it was curated, timed, framed for public consumption. The machinery of monarchy, you realize, is as much about narrative as about rule. You recall the lying in state at Westminster Hall, the silent crowds, the bowed heads, the candles flickering. All of it was genuine grief. And yet, underneath it lay a hidden truth, that the peace they mourned had been administered. They did not know. They were not meant to know. Their grief was for a story crafted to comfort them. That is the legacy of a managed death, not only the life ended, but the narrative shaped to follow. In the years since 1986, Dawson's Act continues to echo. Medical schools use the case in ethics courses. Students are asked, was it murder, mercy, or something between? They debate autonomy, consent, the physician's duty. Some conclude Dawson spared suffering. Others conclude he stole choice. The case remains unresolved, because it touches the very edge of medicine's purpose, to preserve life, to ease death, or to decide between them. You also see how the monarchy handles the revelation. Official statements are few. The royal household neither confirms nor denies, choosing silence as the shield it has always used. George V's tomb at Windsor remains unchanged. Tours at Sandringham mention only that he died there, peacefully. The official narrative persists. History books include the diary note, but often as a sidebar, a curiosity. The public prefers the softer story. The monarchy prefers discretion. Silence continues its work. And yet, you, the witness, cannot escape the memory. You smell the oxygen hiss, the antiseptic tang, the faint scent of carbolic soap used to wipe the syringe. You see Dawson's hand steady, the watch consulted, the plunger descending. You know the truth is not only in words on a diary page, it is in the moment you saw. The moment that changed the end of a king. That is the legacy. A monarch's death that is both peaceful and deliberate, both natural and arranged. It is the paradox Britain lives with. George V is remembered as a dutiful king who died with dignity. And he is remembered, by those who know the diary, as the king euthanized by his doctor. Both are true, both are history, and you, standing at the seam of them, understand what it means to be a witness. Not a tourist in time, not a reader of headlines, a witness to the hour when life and narrative were shaped by a single hand, a single syringe, and a silence that lasted 50 years. You return once more, in memory, to the quiet of Sandringham that night. The lamp's glow has long since gone, the syringe hidden away, the canopy dismantled. Time has rolled forward nearly a century. Empires have collapsed, monarchs have risen and died, and yet that room still holds its shape inside your mind, a sickbed, a doctor's hand, a breath that did not return. George V, king and emperor, ruler of lands stretched across the globe, was reduced in the end to a failing pair of lungs and a body that could no longer resist decline. Power, wealth, ceremony, all could not prevent the final narrowing of the airway, the weakening of the heart. In that sense, his death was universal. Every human meets it, but the manner of his end was not universal. It was managed, timed, adjusted by human will, and that fact lingers like a shadow over his legacy. Dawson's hand, steady with the syringe, has long since stilled. His reasoning, part mercy, part calculation, continues to trouble those who study it. Was he sparing a king? Was he serving a monarchy? Was he simply serving himself, ensuring that history would remember a peaceful close? No answer is sufficient. His act rests in ambiguity, as most human acts do when judged decades later. The monarchy carried on. Edward VIII ascended, abdicated. George VI reigned and fell. Elizabeth II ruled for longer than any before her. Each of them walked in the shadow of George V's example. A life defined by duty, a death defined by silence. The institution absorbed the truth and kept moving. Because that is what monarchy does, it survives, even when individuals falter. But memory is less obedient. Memory refuses to move on so easily. You remember the oxygen hiss, the smell of antiseptic, the rhythm of prayers blending with the rhythm of a fading pulse. You remember the stillness after the second injection, the way the air itself seemed to change, as though history had shifted in the space of a single exhalation. And in remembering, you become the bridge between two truths, the official one, printed in black borders, and the hidden one, written in a doctor's hand. Both are real, both are history, and both reveal something of the human condition. For all his crowns and titles, George V died as all men do, fragile, dependent, mortal. His end reminds us that power cannot buy immunity from death, and yet it also reminds us that power can shape how death is remembered. The line between mercy and manipulation is never so thin as at a deathbed. When silence can conceal as much as it protects. You stand now at Windsor, before the stone that bears his name. Visitors pass, pause, and move on. Some leave flowers, some only silence. None can see the syringe in Dawson's hand, the watch consulted, the calculation made. They see only stone and inscription. Time has swallowed the rest. But you know, you witnessed, and witnessing means carrying both the peace and the disquiet, both the dignity and the deception. History teaches that all power fades, all wealth disperses, all bodies decay. Only memory remains, fragile and contested, waiting for witnesses to keep it alive. That night in 1936 is one such memory. It warns that even kings are not immune to the choices of others. It whispers that every life, no matter how mighty, can be reduced to silence in a single act. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness, and what you have remembered will not leave you again.